Brand new, nuclear-powered, capable of carrying twice as many aircraft as most competing foreign carriers, and protected by an entire task force, the $6.2 billion USS Ronald Reagan seemed invincible leading up to an international wargame exercise in 2005. It was a stunning blow then, and a complete shock, when against all odds, a super stealth submarine from Sweden snuck past the USS Ronald Reagan's defenses and scored enough mock torpedo hits to sink it during multiple attack runs. The Americans never saw it coming, and never saw it leave. The USS Ronald Reagan is one of 10 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers in the possession of the U.S. Navy. The nuclear-powered vessel uses two A4W pressurized water reactors rather than the gas turbines or diesel-electric systems commonly used for warship propulsion. These reactors, like the majority of nuclear power plants, use water as a primary coolant, which is pumped to the core under high pressure where it's heated by fission energy. It then goes into a steam generator and is finally transferred to a secondary system where steam causes turbines to move and by extension gets an electric generator to spin. The nuclear-powered ship counts on 4 propeller shafts, which produce a maximum power of 260,000 shaft horsepower for a top speed of 30 knots or 56 kilometers per hour. Since the vessel uses nuclear energy, it can operate for an estimated 20 years without refueling and has an intended service life of around 50 years. The aircraft carrier is capable of taking with it up to 90 aircraft, while the next largest non-American supercarrier, HMS Queen Elizabeth, can carry 70. The supercarrier is normally defended by escorting destroyers and even the aircraft it carries, and it's also armed with the infrared homing surface-to-air missile system RIM-116. The Gotland submarine is a stealthy, deadly silent, and incredibly cheap war machine. First introduced in 1996, this type of submarine was the first to use an air-dependent propulsion, or AIP system, in the form of a Stirling engine. Stirling engines use a closed cycle of compression and expansion of air so that they can provide thermal energy. Liquid oxygen supports the diesel combustion that drives the cycle, and in the case of the Gotland, it energizes a 75-kilowatt battery. The AIP system is incredibly silent in comparison to traditional diesel submarines, which in the past were viewed as inefficient because they can only stay underwater for a few days before resurfacing, resulting in increased vulnerability. The Stirling engine, though, allows the Gotland-class submarines, of which Sweden has a total of 3, to remain underwater for 2 weeks, traveling at 6 miles an hour. The diesel engine is only turned on while using the snorkel or surfacing. Aside from its engine, the Gotland submarine is packed with features intended to make it undetectable. 27 electromagnets are distributed around the watercraft so that magnetic anomaly detectors will miss its magnetic signature. Furthermore, the hull is coated in sonar-resistant material, and the interior is soundproofed by rubber buffers. A passive sonar, the most common type used for warships, will have a very difficult time picking up the presence of a Gotland-class submarine. The Swedish sub is also easily maneuverable because of the 6 maneuvering surfaces on the rudder and sail, which allow it to swim almost on the sea floor as it advances and even manages sharp turns. Some of the downsides of an AIP diesel submarine are that, unlike the nuclear-powered ones, it can't go on for months without surfacing, nor can it sustain a high speed for long, which means that it can be most effectively used for ambushing a fleet whose position's been identified already, or to defend bases in littoral waters. An open chase, or uncertain threat, may be better faced by nuclear-powered submarines. While the $300 to $400 million price tag may seem attractive, the U.S. Navy has repeatedly dismissed the option of obtaining submarines similar to the Gotland class, as most of the Navy's operations take place far away from the continental United States. It would be extremely difficult for a threat to approach the nation's territory without some sort of preemptive response by vessels already stationed at sea. Gotland-class submarines are generally viewed as more suitable for coastal defense. War games are military exercises for which resources are deployed in a simulation of what an actual confrontation could look like. These exercises provide practice for soldiers, pilots, and crew members, as well as an exploration of strategies, weaknesses, combat readiness, and the effects of warfare on a particular area without actually firing any shots or putting anyone's life at risk. Coordinating a wargame with another country, or several more, allows for testing of different technologies, consideration of foreign tactics, and may serve to show the military might of the nations involved. In 2004, the American government asked to lease the HSWMS Gotland for a year so it could conduct anti-submarine warfare exercises. Starting in June of 2005, the US Navy and the Swedish Navy began collaborating in training exercises in the San Diego area. In a press release by the US Navy from the 3rd Fleet Public Affairs, Swedish liaison officer Lieutenant Commander Peter Ostbring shared, quote, "We are deployed here for at least 1 year and will conduct up to 160 training days at sea, supporting strike groups, individual ships, and rescue submarines, and participating in the tests and development of new equipment." During international exercises, such as those of Sweden and the United States, the national forces will not always be in opposition to one another. Different vessels will trade places or act in different capacities so as to assess the most mutually beneficial tactics of cooperation and to test how nations may fare against their own technologies. Speaking of the HSWMS Gotland submarine, Commander Ostbring also shared some of the ways the submarine was used during one of these war games. Quote, "Initially, it was acting as an opposing force, and in the middle of the exercise, she acted as a green, friendly force submarine, like a third country in a coalition, doing intelligence and reconnaissance missions for the strike group. Later, she returned to being an opposing force." The HSWMS Gotland has played a key role in enhancing the tactical and strategic prowess of the Navy, but it surprised the United States when during one of the war games, it managed to theoretically destroy the powerful USS Ronald Reagan. The sinking of the USS Ronald Reagan fortunately featured no financial or human losses, as it was an unexpected accomplishment by the HSWMS Gotland during the game between the US Navy and the Swedish Navy. The USS Reagan was escorted by a carrier task force, including several anti-submarine vessels. Stealthily, the Swedish submarine snuck past all of them, not once but on multiple attack runs, each time retreating undetected. Points were scored each time the Gotland was able to take close-up photographs of the carrier, simulating the distance from which it would have been able to shoot. The small diesel-powered submarine used its silent Stirling engine and quiet sonars to go undetected by the passive sonars of its adversaries, swimming right past the rest of the vessels not only during that exercise, but throughout the 2 years of collaborative war games. Nuclear-armed submarines, destroyers, and carriers were all bested repeatedly, with reports of American anti-submarine military officers and research specialists feeling demoralized and slightly humiliated by the experience. The result of the war game served to inform and improve the technologies and techniques employed by both countries, with the United States Navy recognizing that its armaments were not particularly effective to combat diesel-electric submarines, which are held not only by Sweden but by antagonistic nations. The HSWMS Gotland had virtually managed to destroy the undefeated USS Ronald Reagan and established itself as an incredibly valuable military asset. One important consideration for the United States following the virtual sinking of the USS Ronald Reagan was that Sweden is not the only country implementing the Stirling engines in their submarines. China has 2 types of these, with a planned stock of 35 partially completed. In fact, Beijing has a Type 032 Qing submarine capable of firing off cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, which is believed to be the largest diesel submarine in operation. Russia, America's eternal adversary, has ordered 2 Lada-class diesel-electric attack submarines scheduled for completion by 2022. AIP systems are also present in submarines acquired by India and Pakistan, which are constantly in tension with one another. American allies such as Spain, South Korea, France, Japan, Israel, and Germany have also developed or purchased similar submarines. In fact, France is working on the SMX Ocean, a supersized AIP diesel submarine which promises to be a functional alternative to nuclear-powered submarines. With evidence of its carrier's weak spots, the Navy decided to ask the Swedes to lease them a Gotland-class submarine to study how to counter its stealth mechanisms, despite the fact that America will most likely remain at peace with the majority of these nations. The Swedish government accepted to lend its HSWMS Gotland commanded and manned beyond the original year-long sets of war games for an additional 12 months, allowing the United States to figure out strategies to combat it, and whether it should acquire a similar submarine. Although after extensive research, the Navy concluded that it preferred to continue using and developing nuclear-powered submarines. The Pentagon saw little use for diesel-electric watercraft, since the majority of patrolling operations are done near Asian and European waters, meaning that traversing oceans from the United States would require constant refueling. In fact, when the Gotland itself was returned to Sweden, it was actually shipped on a mobile dry dock instead of being transported under its own power. Still, the United States Navy learned valuable lessons from seeing its massive supercarrier and accompanying fleet be bested by a small, Swedish diesel-electric submarine. Today, the U.S. remains wary of further technological improvements, particularly by China, that may increase the range of these silent subs and threaten U.S. patrols in the seas around Asia.